In the wasteland that was once North America, fire still burns where nothing should survive. The cities have crumbled into monuments of ash and memory. The heroes who once protected this world are gone, scattered like leaves in a storm that never ended. But something moves through the darkness now, something that carries the weight of vengeance and the face of a dead man. This is the story of how Ghost Rider returned to a world that had forgotten hope, wearing the skin of the most dangerous mutant who ever lived. This is the story of Wolverine's final legacy and the horror that rose from his bones. The fall didn't happen all at once. It never does. Earth had survived cosmic threats before, had weathered invasions and wars that should have ended everything. But this time was different. This time, the cracks ran too deep, and the people meant to hold everything together were already breaking apart from the inside. The Avengers fractured first. Arguments over leadership turned into schisms that couldn't be healed. Captain America and Iron Man, who had rebuilt their friendship after so many conflicts, found themselves on opposite sides of decisions that had no right answers. When the Celestials walked across Europe, crushing cities beneath feet the size of mountains, there was no unified response. Just scattered heroes fighting alone, dying alone, while the world watched through screens that would soon go dark forever. The X-Men weren't any better. Krakoa had promised to be a sanctuary, a nation where mutants could finally live without fear. But the island couldn't carry the weight of the entire planet's survival. Internal politics consumed what should have been humanity's last defenders. Cyclops and Emma Frost argued over resources. Storm tried to broker peace between factions that had stopped listening to reason. And through it all, the threats kept coming, each one larger than the last. Thor vanished during what survivors would later call the God War. One moment he was holding the line against forces that had spilled through a crack in reality itself. The next, he was simply gone, Mjolnir lying silent in a crater that stretched for miles. Dr. Strange burned himself out trying to seal that same rift, pouring every ounce of his mystical energy into a spell that barely held. When it was over, the Sorcerer Supreme was nothing but a hollow shell. His mind shattered across dimensions he could no longer navigate. The Fantastic Four disappeared without explanation. Reed Richards had been working on something in his laboratory, something he refused to discuss even with his own family. Then, one morning, the Baxter building stood empty. No note, no warning, just absence where a family had been. And the villains? They didn't win. They simply stopped fighting. When there's nothing left to conquer, even ambition loses its meaning. Doom retreated to Latveria and sealed the borders. Magneto watched the world burn from the ruins of Genosha, too tired to feel vindicated. The Red Skull died in his bunker, surrounded by wealth that couldn't buy survival. What followed wasn't an apocalypse in the traditional sense. There was no final battle, no moment where everything ended with dramatic certainty. Instead, Earth experienced a slow collapse, a gradual surrender to entropy and despair. Cities crumbled not from attacks, but from neglect. Governments fell not to coups, but to the simple reality that there was nothing left to govern. Firestorms swept across continents, and no one was left to fight them. Through all of this, Ghost Rider was nowhere to be found. The spirit of vengeance had always been Earth's dark protector, the one who punished the guilty when justice failed. Johnny Blaze had carried that burden for years, riding his flaming motorcycle through the night to deliver penance to those who deserved it. But when the world needed him most, he was gone. Some believed he had finally died, consumed by the very flames that gave him power. Others thought hell itself had closed its gates, that even damnation had given up on a world so thoroughly damned already. The survivors learned to live without hope. Blade fed on animals to keep the bloodlust at bay, his vampire hunger a constant reminder of what he'd become. He wandered through the wasteland, killing the monsters that still crawled through the ruins. But there was no satisfaction in it anymore. Just survival, just one night after another. A damaged vision walked through radiation zones that would have killed any organic being, his synthetic mind searching for signs of life that grew rarer with each passing month. He had lost Wanda years ago, lost the Avengers, lost everything that had given his existence meaning. Now he simply walked, recording what he saw, preserving memories for a future that might never come. Laura Kinney, the woman who had inherited Wolverine's legacy, hid in the bones of old Weapon X laboratories. She knew these facilities better than anyone, knew where the supplies were cached and which corridors were still structurally sound. She had learned to be invisible, to move through the wasteland without leaving traces. But she couldn't stop thinking about her father, about Logan, about the man who had shown her that even weapons could choose to be human. Because Logan was gone too. And unlike the others, no one knew how or why. The disappearance of Wolverine wasn't dramatic. There was no final battle, no heroic last stand. He simply vanished, one day present and the next day absent, as if the world had swallowed him whole. Laura had noticed the signs before anyone else. His healing factor was failing. Wounds that should have closed in seconds were taking minutes. Injuries that should have been forgotten by morning were leaving scars. She confronted him about it once, pointing out that he was bleeding longer than usual, and Logan just shrugged. "Maybe I'm getting old," he said, and there was something in his voice that she had never heard before. Acceptance. The theories multiplied in his absence. Some believed it was adamantium poisoning, that the metal bonded to his skeleton had finally accumulated enough toxicity to overwhelm even his legendary regeneration. Others blamed Weapon X, suggesting that the experiments performed on him decades ago had included time-delayed genetic degradation, a kill switch waiting to be triggered. A few whispered that Krakoa itself had rejected him, that the island's consciousness had deemed him unworthy of mutant paradise. Whatever the cause, Logan knew his time was ending, and rather than burden anyone with his death, he chose to face it alone. The last confirmed sighting placed him in the Canadian mountains, deep in the snow-covered wilderness near the original Weapon X facility. That place had always been cursed. The walls remembered every scream, every experiment, every moment of agony inflicted on the man who would become Wolverine. The ground had soaked in so much blood that nothing grew there even decades later. It made a terrible kind of sense that Logan would return to where it all began, that he would close the circle of his existence in the same place where his humanity had been stripped away. But he wasn't alone out there. Weapon X hadn't been completely destroyed. A few of their scientists had survived, the kind of minds that viewed ethics as obstacles and human suffering as data. They had watched the world collapse from their underground laboratories, and they had seen an opportunity in the chaos. With the heroes gone, with oversight non-existent, they could finally complete projects that had been abandoned years ago. They wanted to create a new kind of weapon, not another mutant soldier, not another clone with programmed loyalty. Something far more ambitious. They wanted to harness the spirit of vengeance itself, to bind it to a vessel that could survive the burning and direct its power with precision. The problem had always been containment. The spirit of vengeance was too powerful for any normal host. Johnny Blaze had survived only because he was exceptional, because his will was strong enough to maintain some control over the entity sharing his body. Anyone else would have been consumed, burned from the inside out by hellfire that recognized no limits. But what if the host couldn't burn? What if the vessel possessed regeneration so powerful that it could heal faster than the flames could destroy? What if the body was already reinforced with indestructible metal, already conditioned to endure unimaginable pain? They needed Wolverine, and when they tracked him to those mountains, they found exactly what they were looking for. His body, cold and silent, lying in the snow near the ruins of the facility where he had been created. He wasn't quite dead. His healing factor, weakened as it was, still fought to keep his cells alive. His heart beat once every few minutes. His brain showed minimal activity. He existed in a state between life and death, too stubborn to fully surrender even when his body had given up. They took him. What followed was a fusion of science and sorcery, of cutting-edge genetic manipulation and rituals older than human civilization. Weapon X had made contact with forces that existed beyond the material world, had bargained for knowledge that should have remained hidden. They rebuilt Logan's body piece by piece, reinforcing what remained and replacing what had failed. They grafted new tissue onto old, using techniques that blurred the line between medicine and necromancy. And then they performed the binding. The spirit of vengeance didn't come willingly. It had to be summoned, trapped, forced into a vessel it would never have chosen. The scientists used containment circles inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at, chanted words and languages that predated human speech. They poured hellfire into Wolverine's reconstructed form, watching as flames that should have consumed everything instead merged with adamantium-laced flesh. When the ritual was complete, the body on the table opened its eyes. They weren't Logan's eyes. They weren't Johnny Blaze's eyes. They were something new, something that blazed with hellfire and reflected nothing but emptiness. The spirit of vengeance was inside, but it was confused, disoriented, struggling to understand what had happened to it. And mixed with the spirit, tangled in ways that couldn't be separated, were fragments of Logan's consciousness. Memories, instincts, guilt. So much guilt. The rider that rose from that table was broken in ways that Weapon X hadn't anticipated. The spirit of vengeance operated on a simple principle: punish the guilty. It read sins like a book, saw the darkness in human souls, and delivered justice with flames that burned away everything corrupt. But this spirit couldn't read clearly anymore. Logan's memories were interfering, flooding the entity with experiences it hadn't lived and emotions it couldn't process. The spirit felt Logan's rage, his grief, his endless, overwhelming sense of failure. Every life he hadn't saved, every friend he had watched die, every time his claws had found the wrong target, every moment when the animal inside had won over the man. These memories weren't the spirit's own, but it couldn't tell the difference anymore. It absorbed Logan's guilt as if it were its own, and that guilt corrupted its fundamental purpose. The rider no longer distinguished between innocent and guilty. In its fractured perception, everyone carried sin. Everyone deserved punishment. The whole world was stained with the failures that Logan had accumulated over his centuries of existence. Weapon X realized their mistake too late. They had wanted a weapon they could control, a Ghost Rider that would follow orders and eliminate targets with precision. Instead, they had created something that recognized no masters and no limits. The rider burned through the facility in minutes, leaving nothing but ash and screaming echoes. Then it walked out into the wasteland, searching for more guilt to punish, searching for more of itself to destroy. The first reports were dismissed as hallucinations. Survivors in the wasteland were prone to seeing things, their minds cracking under the pressure of endless survival. But the stories kept coming, each one more detailed than the last, each one describing the same impossible figure. A motorcycle made of bones, wrapped in flames that never died. A rider cloaked in smoke and fire, moving through the ruins like a specter of judgment. And a face that everyone recognized. A face that had graced wanted posters and hero worship alike for generations. Wolverine's face. The survivors, who got close enough to see details, reported something worse than a simple disguise. This wasn't someone wearing a mask or using holographic technology. The rider had Logan's actual features, scarred and weathered, twisted by firelight, but unmistakably his. The claws emerged from between his knuckles with the same familiar sound. The body moved with Logan's predatory grace, the economy of motion that came from centuries of combat experience. But the eyes were wrong. They burned with hellfire, and behind them was nothing that could be called human. Danny Moonstar, attempted a psychic scan when the rider passed near her hiding place. She had retained her abilities even after everything fell apart, and she thought she might be able to glimpse what was really inside that burning shell. The contact lasted less than a second. She described it later as staring into a screaming void, a place where two souls were tearing each other apart in an endless loop of rage and guilt. She didn't try again. The rider's pattern of destruction defied any logic the survivors could understand. Sometimes it appeared in warlord camps, burning the killers and slavers who had risen to power in the absence of law. That made a terrible kind of sense, a Ghost Rider doing what Ghost Riders had always done. But other times it struck communities of innocent people, farming collectives, and refugee camps where no one had committed any crime worse than trying to survive. Children died in those attacks, families, people who had done nothing but exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. The old Ghost Rider had possessed a moral compass, however dark. Johnny Blaze had struggled with the spirit of vengeance, had fought to direct its power toward those who truly deserve punishment. This rider had no such struggle. It simply burned, moving from one target to the next in a pattern that seemed almost random. Almost. Cable was the first to realize the truth. His technological implants were failing, corrupted by years of neglect and damage. But he could still process data better than anyone else alive. He tracked the rider's movements across what remained of North America, plotting each attack on deteriorating maps, looking for the pattern that had to exist. And he found it. The rider wasn't moving randomly. It was spiraling inward, circling toward specific locations with increasing frequency. Places that had meaning to Wolverine. The ruins of Xavier's school. The remains of Weapon X facilities. Sites where Logan had fought significant battles or lost people he cared about. It was hunting his past, burning away everything that connected to the memories trapped inside it. And if that pattern held, it would eventually reach the survivors, the people who had known Logan, the people who still carried pieces of him in their hearts. It would reach Laura. She refused to run. The others argued with her, pleaded with her to see reason. Blade pointed out that they had no weapons capable of stopping a Ghost Rider, especially one wrapped in adamantium-reinforced flesh. Cable showed her the projections, the mathematical certainty that a direct confrontation would end in their deaths. Even Vision, whose synthetic mind processed everything through cold logic, suggested that survival should take priority over sentiment. But Laura had made her decision. If there was any chance that Logan was still in there, any fragment of the man who had taught her to be more than a weapon, she had to try to reach him. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much. Because if she ran now, if she let fear dictate her choices, then everything Logan had taught her about being human was meaningless. They set up in the ruins of Xavier's school. The building had been destroyed years ago, during one of the countless attacks that had targeted mutant kind. But the foundations remained, and the ground still held echoes of what had been. This was where Logan had found something like family, where he had trained young mutants and argued with Scott Summers and slowly, grudgingly allowed himself to care about something beyond his own survival. If anywhere could reach whatever remained of him, it was here. They prepared what defenses they could. EMP nets to disrupt the motorcycle. Magic wards contributed by a hedge which they had encountered in the wasteland. Physical barriers that would slow down anything short of a tank. None of them believed it would be enough. But preparation was better than waiting passively for death. The rider came at dusk. They heard it before they saw it. The rumble of an engine that sounded like grinding bones. The crackle of flames that burned without consuming fuel. Then it crested the hill that overlooked the school grounds, a silhouette of fire against the darkening sky. It didn't stop at their defenses. The EMP nets discharged uselessly against flames that weren't electrical. The wards flickered and died, overwhelmed by a power that predated their construction. The physical barriers lasted a few seconds longer, adamantium claws shredding through metal and concrete like paper. Then the rider was standing in the courtyard, surrounded by the ghosts of everything this place had represented. Laura stepped forward. She wasn't armed. She had retracted her claws, leaving her hands empty. In one palm, she held a small metal object, tarnished by age, but still legible. Logan's original dog tags, the ones he had worn when he first arrived at this school, before he knew who he really was. The rider watched her approach. The flames around it didn't diminish, but they didn't intensify either. Something in its posture suggested uncertainty, a predator encountering prey that didn't behave as expected. Laura stopped within arm's reach, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from the rider's body, close enough that one swipe of those burning claws would end her life. She held up the dog tags. "You told me once," she said, her voice steady despite everything. that rage without purpose is a cage, that the animal inside you wasn't something to be destroyed, but something to be directed. You said that being a weapon didn't mean you couldn't choose your targets. The rider didn't respond, but the flames flickered just for a moment, as if something inside was listening. I know you're in there, Laura continued. Not just the spirit, not just the thing they created. You, Logan, my father, the man who showed me that I could be more than what they made me. She took another step closer, close enough now that the heat was almost unbearable. I'm not asking you to fight it. I'm not asking you to win. I'm just asking you to remember. Remember who you were. Remember who you wanted to be. Remember that you chose to be human, even when it would have been easier to stay an animal. The silence stretched between them, and then the rider spoke. The voice was wrong, layered with harmonics that shouldn't have existed, filtered through flames and fury. But underneath all of that, buried like a heartbeat beneath tons of rubble, was something familiar. Run. One word. Just one word. But it wasn't the spirit speaking. It wasn't the weapon that Weapon X had created. It was Logan, trapped inside his own burning body, fighting against the thing that had consumed him, and still trying to protect the people he loved. What happened next exists only in fragments. Cable's recording equipment overloaded during the event, capturing only bursts of static and corrupted data. The survivors who witnessed it described it differently, their memories altered by the sheer impossibility of what they saw. Some kind of psychic event rippled outward from a rider, a wave of force that wasn't physical but felt like being struck by something immense. The flames around the creature intensified, shifting through colors that had no names, burning with an intensity that should have vaporized everything within miles. But nothing burned. Instead, there was a scream. Two screams layered on top of each other, one of rage and one of release. The rider's body convulsed, claws extending and retracting in spasmodic bursts. The motorcycle behind it collapsed into a pile of bones that immediately began to smolder. Inside that burning shell, a war was being fought. The spirit of vengeance, corrupted and confused, was trying to maintain its hold on the vessel it had been forced into. But Logan was fighting back, using the only weapons he had left. His memories, his will, the adamantium core of stubbornness that had carried him through centuries of trauma. He wasn't trying to destroy the spirit. He knew that was impossible. The spirit of vengeance was eternal, a force of cosmic justice that would simply find another host if this one was destroyed. Instead, he was trying to separate himself from it, to untangle his consciousness from the entity that had been fused with his remains. It was like trying to pull apart two flames that had merged into one fire. Every memory he reclaimed tore at the spirit's hold. Every moment of clarity he achieved weakened the fusion that Weapon X had created. And somewhere in that internal struggle, something broke. Not the spirit, not Logan, the bond, the forced connection that Weapon X had engineered, the chains that had held two incompatible beings together in the same tortured form, shattered. From the outside, it looked like an implosion. The flames collapsed inward, consuming themselves in a spiral of diminishing light. The body at the center twisted, changing, becoming something that was neither fully Rider nor fully Wolverine. Then there was silence. The survivors approached carefully, not trusting that it was over. Blade kept his sword drawn. Cable scanned for energy signatures. Vision recorded everything, preserving a moment that might be the last chapter of a story that had begun before any of them were born. In the center of the courtyard, surrounded by a circle of scorched earth, there was nothing left but ash, and a single word, carved into the concrete by claws that had burned with their final effort: free. Laura knelt beside the marking, tracing the letters with her fingers. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears didn't help anything, but she allowed herself a moment of stillness, a breath of grief for the man who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return. The dog tags lay in the ash, somehow untouched by the destruction around them. She picked them up, held them against her chest, and made a silent promise to carry them until she no longer could. It was Blade who broke the silence. "Is it over?" Laura stood, her eyes scanning the horizon where smoke still rose from the rider's passage. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if anything's ever really over." In the days that followed, life in the wasteland continued its grim rhythm. Survivors scavenged and hid and tried to build something that might last. The story of what happened at Xavier's school spread through the scattered communities, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some versions painted Laura as a hero who had defeated the demon through love alone. Others claimed that Wolverine had never really died, that he had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Cable's analysis of the event suggested that both the spirit of vengeance and Logan's consciousness had been dispersed by the separation. Not destroyed necessarily, but scattered, their energies dissipating into patterns that his equipment couldn't track. The spirit would probably reform eventually, drawn back together by the cosmic forces that had created it. What would happen to Logan's scattered essence was less certain, but there were reports in the weeks that followed. Sightings that didn't fit any pattern. Mountain communities spoke of footprints burned into solid rock, appearing overnight in places no one could reach. Travelers in the deep wilderness described a figure walking across impossible terrain, neither solid nor ghostly, but something in between. And on clear nights, when the sky was dark enough to show stars that humanity had almost forgotten existed, some people swore they saw a shape moving among the clouds. Not riding, walking, as if searching for something that couldn't be found in the physical world. Laura heard these reports and wondered. The pragmatic part of her, the part that had been trained to assess threats and respond with violence, dismissed them as wishful thinking. The wasteland bred hallucinations and false hope in equal measure. But another part of her, the part that Logan had nurtured into existence through patience and example, allowed itself to consider other possibilities. What if the separation hadn't destroyed him? What if it had transformed him into something new? Something that existed between the mortal world and whatever lay beyond? What if the man who had spent his whole life struggling with the monster inside him had finally found a form that didn't require that struggle? She kept the dog tags around her neck, a weight that reminded her of everything she had lost and everything she still carried. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between survival and sleep, she would hold them and whisper words that no one else could hear. "Rest well, old man. You've earned it." Whether he could hear her was a question she couldn't answer. But the asking mattered more than the response, because that was what Logan had taught her in the end. That hope wasn't about certainty. It was about continuing forward even when the path disappeared. It was about choosing to believe in something better, even when all evidence suggested that nothing better was possible. The wasteland stretched out in every direction, broken and burned and seemingly beyond redemption. But life persisted in the cracks. Communities rebuilt what they could. Children were born who had never known the world before its fall. And somewhere out there, walking through dimensions the humans couldn't perceive, a ghost made of memory and fire continued its endless journey. Not seeking vengeance anymore, not punishing the guilty, just watching, remembering, waiting for whatever came next. The story of the Ghost Rider who wore Wolverine skin would become legend in the years that followed. Parents would tell it to children as a warning about the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. Warriors would invoke it before battle, calling on the spirit of vengeance to guide their blades. And those who had lived through it would carry the memory like a scar, evidence of a time when the world had almost ended and something impossible had risen from the ashes. But legends have a way of simplifying truth. The reality was messier, more tragic, more human despite involving beings that had transcended humanity in every measurable way. It was a story about love and loss, about the prices we pay for power and the debts that can never be fully repaid. It was about a man who had lived too long and a spirit that had burned too bright, forced together by those who understood neither. And in the end, it was about freedom. The word carved into the concrete remained visible for years, long after the rest of the rubble had been cleared or buried. Visitors would come to see it, to touch the letters that had been seared into stone by adamantium claws burning with hellfire. They would wonder what it meant, what the creature that had terrorized the wasteland had been trying to communicate in its final moments. Laura could have told them, but some truths are too personal to share with strangers.